So we have this problem of, well, essentially it's far safer to assume the worst in people's intentions than assume the best. So we struggle to see the light side of things because of ancient defense mechanisms. At least this is a major contributing factor, I believe. Our brains are set up to defend the tribe or those that have similar ideals to us in our ideologies, as well as defend the individual organism and its ego. And that ego is largely constructed on looking good to the tribe and looking like you have value to the tribe. When someone challenges that, or when someone even begins to touch on that at all, you can encounter this just instant reactivity, an instant desire to defend that ego to the utmost. And some people never grow out of this, and most people don't grow out of any of this at all. This is why I'm making this, is because these are the things that need to be taught. These are perennial problems. So the way that I like to talk about this is keeping one eye open for how to view people in the best light possible, while keeping the other eye open on being taken advantage of. Because if you give too much of yourself, we can run out of spiritual and physical energy, and you can run out of actual resources and money and things that you need to help yourself survive. So you don't want to be taken advantage of, but you do want to be in this default mode of trying to view the world in the best way and view other people in the best way possible, assuming the best about their intentions, and doing so in a way that doesn't get you taken advantage of, and not succumbing to rose-colored glasses either. This metaphor of viewing everything through rose-colored glasses is quite important, because we don't want to deceive ourselves. Now, this is very complicated as well, a very philosophical problem here. Albert Camus about this a lot. He said that we must engage in a proper lie, and Becker talked about this as well. We do kind of have to wear rose-colored glasses to an extent, because reality is harsh. Reality is red in tooth and claw, and we have to really try to view life in general from the best way possible, without deceiving ourselves and without making ourselves too safe or too fragile. So folks like Jonathan Haidt and all that, they go very far into the field of anti-fragility, and there's a lot of political underpinnings with this as well, but we want to be able to engage in a life that is positive. Well, for instance, I'm giving this presentation from inside an air-conditioned, perfectly conditioned area. I'm very sheltered in that way, quite literally and metaphorically. And if I stay in this environment for too long, I will become fragile. I will lack sunlight. I will lack the natural exposures to the harsh reality that make me emotionally and physically resilient. And so I must go out and I must exercise outside. I must go out and do some real camping when I can, and go out and get sunlight between the hours of 8 and 10 a.m. for at least 15 to 30 minutes every morning, as is recommended by various neuroscientists. Putting myself through these, more of a better alignment with the harshness of reality, or just being more one with nature, as it were, this will make me become a more positive individual, and I will have a more positive bias as opposed to a negativity bias. So that being said, we have another bias called the absolutism bias. This is just black and white thinking. I'm sure you've heard of this. We have, again, as we talked about before, the need to avoid cognitive dissonance, and we end up succumbing to confirmation bias. Whatever confirms our previously held biases is what's most prominently arising in our brains, and whatever aligns with our currently held sense of self, and whatever aligns with our currently held tribe. This all kind of tempts us. This pulls us in ways that don't necessarily result in the best versions of ourselves, and create bad behaviors in us, unfortunately. This one is so pernicious because it can deceive us in ways that we don't understand. We can easily become overwhelmed by confirmation bias and black and white thinking, to the point that it compromises our relationships. You see this when you have Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners with your family, and the conversation leans towards what's most meaningful to us in life, and a lot of that is indeed our ideologies, because that source of meaning goes so deeply under-examined that people will just defend, and not really consider. People will supplant their relationships for this. We'll compromise our genuine connection with those that we love the most to support these black and white ideologies. And this one is just, it's a really big problem in my family, and it's a big problem in much of the United States culture. And I'm hoping that psychologists and psychiatrists can begin to address these issues in a way that's also gentle and compassionate. Because that's part of the job, I believe. A psychologist is not meant to just help you deal with the ways that you're feeling or help you deal with your own mental illness, as it were, but also address these big problems like black and white thinking and correct what's called limiting beliefs in cognitive behavioral therapy. That I would consider a limiting belief. These are belief systems that we succumb to, and without questioning them, we'll be living a very limited life. Anyways, the next category here is, well, I just want to throw this on here, the psychologist fallacy. So this is the idea that we can end up saying, I know what you're feeling, or thinking that we relate and we project our own feelings onto our patients that we're working with. This comes from two sources. This comes from our innate abilities towards empathy and our wanting to relate to the people that we're trying to help. From a very heartfelt place, we can empathize and somatize other people's feelings. And there are many neurobiological defaults to explain this as well. So we see this a lot in other cultures as well, more than our own, I believe, in the United States. For example, Taiwan and Sri Lanka and India, you see a very much more deep conception of the oneness of everyone, and this concept of pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination, the idea that we all arise from the same genetic makeup, going all the way back to the Big Bang. We are of nature, we are of this world, and we are a very connected, interwoven social species. In the United States, we see a lack of that. We see more of the prioritization of the individualism, and this is very prominent in Western culture versus Eastern culture in general, as these two ways of being and thinking and philosophizing have branched apart over the years. We have the prioritization of, well, the self-identity, going back to the existential crisis of identity here. We're absorbed and obsessed with that. I mean, just look at what we do on social media. Like, it's all about me. It's all about flaunting my most superficial physical appearance, for one thing, and just flaunting my skills, my abilities, and my attributes. We have this in the bio section of basically all social media platforms. These are your accolades. This is how you identify. And that's good. You want to have that, but if that has nothing to do with the rest of the community, then that's kind of worthless. So there's an interesting statistic that's come up recently. In China and in many other countries, children are still responding to the question of what do you want to be when you grow up by answering a fireman or an astronaut, or the typical answers. In the United States, that has now shifted to influencer. That has now shifted to this word that's just arisen from the ether to describe having influence over other people in ways that are just like not positive and non-meaningful influence, and just being a person that thinks they have it all figured out, and they're running on that unsubstantial core, I guess you could say. So we want to watch out for that. We want to make sure that as psychologists, we're not exacerbating that. We want to encourage a meaningful type of purpose, and getting the patient to question the influence that they have on others in a way that will have positive impact. Like, we don't want to sell ourselves, we want to sell our values, I guess you could put it. So we want to be wary not to over-relate to our patients from the natural social compassion element and the idea of somatization and projecting as well. But we also want to be wary of authority complexes. So this is really unfortunate, but it happens to everyone, it seems, at some level. Going back to the Dunning-Kruger effect, once we get our PsyD, once we recognize our ignorance and end up going to college and go through the valley of despair and realizing our ignorance, we try to work up the chain and work up the education system to reach these degrees and certificates, and that gives us a sense of authority. Once you've got that PhD or that PsyD, you feel like you know something. And that is true. You do know. You are very well informed, but you are now informed in a way that is monomathic. But that's different for everyone. That's a process that requires lots of practice, and mastery is not something that you achieve in just 10,000 hours or whatever it is. Like, the problem of expertise is that it's never fully realized. We are always in a learning process, and we don't like to think that way. The brain wants to compartmentalize on an ego that is an expert in some field that exemplifies value to the tribe. And so we want people to turn to us for our expertise. That makes us feel valuable, gives our lives meaning. But again, we're never fully there. Like, we have to always remember our ignorance, remember the capacities of our knowledge, and realize that when we have this degree in this one specialty, it is indeed a specialty. It is a profession that is viewing through one lens. And this is why I believe psychology is best done through multiple fields. Ideally, it would be a process that the patient is going through every day, not every couple weeks or so, as people tend to do. And many people can't afford to even do that really need it. The project of healing the human mind is a project for multiple fields of expertise. The psychologist, the therapist, or the psychoanalyst, the nutritionist, the health expert or exercise coach, a sleep analyst, ideally an anthropologist, somebody that knows about the cultural impact on an individual, and the existential philosopher or the philosophical therapist. All of this is involved, and much of these other angles seem to be ignored in Western culture. So, not to get into this too deeply, but a book I've recently been reading called The Crazy Like Us, the westernization of American culture across the world. The examination of that it's showing how over many years we've spread our American style psychology to other cultures, and we're realizing the faults in that. We're realizing that there are many ways to go about healing the human mind, and much of that concerns society and culture of that area, and much of that is being ignored in the United States. A lot of it is indeed back to this whole individualism idea, this whole problem of viewing people as just the individual that needs to be fixed and not the culture that's run. Now, there is a lot of acknowledgement of externally influencing factors like Bronfenbrenner's bioecological system, and a lot of that comes into play as well, but there's also the aspect of somatization, or like social somatization, I suppose you could call it. The idea that people absorb the feelings of others. This is much more acknowledged in the psychology approaches taken on by other cultures. And we'll get to this more in the future. So we also have the issue of being adversity averse. So this is another big problem in the United States. I don't want to use the term anti-fragility, but that's pretty apt. The problem is that we are becoming incredibly overstimulated, and we can't even do nothing. Like, we face boredom and we can't take it for more than 5 minutes. A good example of this is asking someone to remain in a seated position in a closet in a dark room for more than 5 minutes. And according to statistics, most people cannot do that, especially the much younger generation. We want to talk about self-awareness and being at home in yourself and being at one with your mind. And when we approach that from a place that is psychological or prognostic and pathologizing in the way that we go about diagnosis, we're kind of using the Band-Aid method, not to denigrate psychology or whatever. But that's kind of what we're doing in that process. We're very much becoming adverse to any adversity, any challenges or things that require a significant amount of struggle. We now turn away from. We turn to what's wrong with me and give me the quickest means of fixing that. And then, of course, this has to do with psychiatry and requesting drugs to fix these problems, but also quick fix therapy methods. So Rebecca uses the term McMindfulness, where we borrow from ancient practices that have a lot of roots in spirituality and culture, and we condense them into a 10-step process. And we expect people to well, we just sell that. We don't really expect a lot of progress from that. It seems that a lot of people that are writing these books and trying these methods do indeed want to help people from a good place, but they don't realize that they're setting them up for failure. They're setting them up for non-reflective and non-introspective practices that are a lifelong commitment. Like meditation, for instance. This is not something that you're going to get results from after 10 days or after a 30-day challenge or whatever it is. And yet that's how we market self-help in this country. Again, we have lots of sayings over the years that have exemplified this, no pain, no gain. Adversity is the key to your next best self, and challenges present learning opportunities and all these concepts. But now what we're doing is forming terms like rejection sensitive dysphoria and saying that we are naturally predisposed to not being able to handle rejection. For example, this is becoming really problematic online, especially, and in in just public vernacular, people are talking about RSD as a symptom of ADHD when that's not even in the DSM-5. Neither is neurodivergence or neurotypicality as well, I should point out, because what is a typical brain? We don't have a model for what a normal brain looks like anyways. But we have these terms like social anxiety and rejection sensitivity, and we attach the ancient Greek word dysphoria to it, which means unbearable. And so people, like, they take that label and they believe that they can do nothing with that, and that's what's holding them back, and there's nothing they can do to get over that or to work past it. So the whole concept of being open to criticism and open to change and challenges just doesn't come to the surface. The people just shy away and use the term social anxiety disorder or social anxiety to describe how they cannot face this adversity, how they are just not cut out for it, or they're not the kind of brain to be able to handle that. And that's hugely problematic. That limits you. I mean, it's a limiting belief in my opinion. This limits the brain's ability to grow. And when we introduce this language into the public, this is why I'm making this video, is to encourage, one of the reasons, to encourage psychologists really be careful with the language that you're introducing to your clients. In the process of being gentle, in the process of trying to convey these rather difficult messages to our patients, we could be introducing potentially too soft ways of thinking. I'm trying to be really careful with the way I talk about this, but I hope you understand my point. I succumbed to this for many years myself. Well, I'll give two examples before moving on. We have the spoon theory, or spoon metaphor, where I only have so many spoons of energy to give for the day, and then it's spent. Those spoons are gone, and then I have to go home to recharge my spoons, or I'm done for the day. That idea goes directly against the concept of a second and third wind. When your spoons are all spent when you're running and you feel like that's it, you can either choose to quit or push through it and gain a second wind and start charging back up. And there are other ways to look at this too. If you're socially anxious, or if you're experiencing anxiety, or experiencing anxiousness, I should say, at a party or something, for example, you can choose to go out of the party, take a few deep breaths, maybe a 5-10 minute break in your car or something, and then possibly go back. You don't have to consider this as what's the term? Social battery. That's another really problematic term that the public has just absorbed and run with. And the other example I want to give is myself from, I want to say 2009 to almost 2011, so about a year and a half, I was completely beholden to my own diagnosis of central language processing disorder and auditory processing disorder. I've fortunately been able to overcome this and start to question that label. But for literally a year and a half, I did nothing but mumble, if not say anything at all. There were many days where I just didn't speak and just gave up, because I would surpass filters, or I would just not realize that I could develop filters, and I would speak in ways that did not represent me, and just living by superficial means. And so I took that label of central language processing disorder, and it owned me, along with the ADHD label that I acquired. That owned the way that I performed for that entire period, and I did for years afterwards as well. Eventually I just got sick of living like that, and I started speaking again, and it just dealt with the consequences until around age 26 or 27, 2016, 2017 is when I really started taking online courses in CBT and communications, and realized that, oh, wait a minute, this disorder is completely going against me and is not real, or at least not real in any sense that's affecting me. And I really started making progress in that way, and started writing on my thoughts, and started conducting myself in a much more mature and fluid manner. And meditation also helped with this as well, especially mindfulness meditation, being able to catch my thoughts before they just come out of my mouth. That, I mean, that wasn't really taught to me. I mean, my therapist back then, they did kind of mention that, but that's, again, when it comes to things that we have to continue to work on, we have to continuously talk about these issues. Like, we have to keep reminding our patients, hey, are you still introspecting? Are you still doing these self-awareness practices that we talked about a month ago? And what are ways that you can improve on that? Have you been able to introspect in a way that allows you to understand ways that you can improve on that? And are you practicing your mindfulness meditations? Are you practicing affirmations and really talking to yourself and checking yourself? Anyways,